Hi, this is Walter Carmichael. This is my impressions for week 9, the view of the prophets on the future of the people of God. So, in reading the prophets of the Old Testament, a few things came to mind. They recognized the false nature of God's people and called them to account. God wanted true worship solely directed at Him. He wanted His chosen people to attend to His laws. God wanted the people of Israel and Judah to look after those who could not look after themselves, the poor, the widows, and the orphans. He desired that they foster a sense of community and take care of each other. Instead, what he saw were people accumulating wealth by any means necessary, leaders that were very self-indulgent, and treaties being made with foreign powers. At times, he even watched Judah and Israel fight amongst each other. What the prophets sought was to call out the two kingdoms for their wretched behavior and force the leaders to realize their folly and repent. For Israel, this came from Amos and Hosea, both of who rallied against Israel for her misdeeds and warned of the impending doom from the Assyrians. Both asked God for mercy for their people, but as the people would not listen, they were destined for destruction. Judah received many more warnings, but Isaiah and Micah were the contemporaries of Amos and Hosea. Isaiah talks about both the Assyrian and Babylonian threat, but most importantly that God will redeem his people after their suffering. Isaiah, during the second part of his works, takes for granted that the Babylonian invasion and destruction will come. However, he mentions the coming of a prince and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. He's hopeful that the kingdom will be brought back into a state of wholeness and holiness once the price for its sins have been paid. Micah too offers hope for reconciliation, but his main thrust for me was how he talked about the mistreatment of the poor and the helpless when compared with the greed of the upper classes. In the pre-exile period, the future for Israel and Judah from the view of the prophets is excruciatingly painful. But it requires a trust in God that all will be restored, so there is some sense of hope, although it seems very distant in the far-flung future. 6 prophets fell at the time in which Judah is exiled to Babylon. By now, Israel is already exiled thanks to Assyria, and so there are no more prophets for them. My personal favorite of these books is Daniel. Unlike most of the prophetic books, his is one that tells a story in a fluid narrative instead of just a list of damning proclamations or cryptic messages about the future. That said, the purpose of these books was to remind the people about the purpose of the exile and to keep them firmly focused on serving their time and doing their best in the realm of Babylon while they were there so that they could return as they had been promised. Through stories like Daniel, other countries as well learned the power of the Hebrew God. Nebuchadnezzar was even in awe of Daniel's ability to read signs and understand wonders, to the point that he raised Daniel up as a high-ranking leader in the Babylonian government. Prophets during the exile were there to provide hope of redemption. They were there to remind the people that all of this was part of God's plan, and not to worry, but to stay the course and to stay faithful. Because it was God that had brought the Assyrians down on Israel. It was God that had brought the Babylonians down on Judah. And therefore it will be God again that brings Israel or Judah and the people of that brings God's people back out of exile into their promised lands. Both the story of the fiery furnace and the lion's den hopefully would have inspired positive esteem on the part of fellow exiles, so that they would see that the strong faith of Daniel was something that could be emulated, that the king at least respected, and that could be helpful for them in keeping their spirits up and reminding them whose they are and who they serve. Once the end of the exile was in sight, the prophets continued their relentless drive to keep the people focused on God in order to be redeemed and to live into the covenant he had made with them. Everything from reminding them to work on the temple to how other armies feared God while they had disrespected him was used. Even a criticism of the people of Edom, the descendants of Esau, didn't escape the view of the prophets. The main drive of the prophets in this age was to get people to see the process all the way to its conclusion. The exile was over, so now they needed to redirect their attentions. The other thing that the prophets made sure to emphasize was that, at least at this point, was that those countries who had taken part in the destruction of Judah and Israel would pay a price for that, because they had gone over and above the means that God had asked them, had expected in their destruction. I believe the prophets were very aware, sometimes through physical pain inflicted upon them, how hard their jobs were going to be. Through it all, they stayed true to their purpose and reminded the people of who God was and why they followed him. The events that were occurring were punishments for not following him, but that after the punishments would come a time of reconciliation. Everything was in God's hands, and God was in control, and the people needed to learn to trust him and not look into these false gods made of wood or stone or metal. God loved his people fiercely, and it was that love that made God so desperately want to see his people love him back. But it was also that love that allowed for anger to rise and compassion to rule. For even though he punished them, he did plan to have a way back for them. I don't believe their intent was necessary to imply that a Messiah was coming in the form of Jesus. Not yet, anyway. Although several key pieces of text from the prophets do seem to point the Christian reader in that direction. Instead, I believe it was merely a message of what getting back into a right relationship with God would look like, since God seemed to imply that he believed his people would be more holy once the exile was over. So that's pretty much all I've got. They were hopeful for a future, although they realized tough times were ahead. The job of a prophet is certainly never easy. Thanks. Hope you look forward to your comments.